This week on Africa Update, hundreds march across cities in Kenya, South Africa, Senegal and Tunisia in protest over rising cost of living and perceived political injustice. We examine government's reaction to agitations and dissenting voices. Also on the program, activists embark on 862-kilometer walk to advocate for a federation between Mali and Burkina Faso. Welcome to the program. I am Ayuba Ilya, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. From the north to south, east to west of the African continent, 4 countries, namely Tunisia, South Africa, Kenya and Senegal, citizens have taken to the streets to protest rising inflation and what they consider political injustice. Led by opposition leaders, they took to the streets calling out their respective presidents' inaction to address economic and political hurdles bedeviling their countries. Julius Malema, the leader of the South Africa's Economic Freedom Fighters Party, led citizens in various cities to push for President Cyril Ramaphosa's resignation following an endless circle of economic crisis facing the country.
Down with load shedding, down. Down with unemployment, down. Down with unemployment, down. Puma Ramaphosa, Puma. Puma Ramaphosa, Puma. Today, there is no big mall, there is no small mall, no shop, no factory, no school, no nothing is open today. All of them are closed.
Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga, who lost in the last general elections, led demonstrations against what he deemed a deliberate increase in the cost of living caused by new taxes and inability to control inflation. Odinga still claims he won the presidential race last August, maintaining that he will never acknowledge Ruto as a legitimate president. He also announced a continuous weekly protest every Monday to demand resignation of President William Ruto.
Hello! Hello! Vijana! Tuko pale Madam Gogo, Gavana Wanga. Tuko hapo na Bwana Kioni.
In a similar vein, thousands of supporters of Senegalese opposition leader Ousmane Sonko rallied in Dakar as the country prepares for elections in less than a year. Sonko is being accused of defamation, rape and sending death threats to an employee at a beauty salon. Accusations his supporters believe are politically motivated to scuttle his chances of standing for elections. Tensions are rising ahead of the vote in a country seen as a democratic mainstay in the region amid speculation that President Macky Sall could bypass the constitution and seek a third presidential term. Also, thousands of Tunisians rallied in the streets of the capital, Tunis, protesting President Kais Saied's perceived autocratic rule. They want Said to resign for orchestrating what they feel was a coup last July, pushing for unpopular constitutional amendments. They accuse him of cracking down on dissenting politicians, labor union figures, judges, a prominent businessman, and the head of an independent radio station.
I am 63 years old. I came today because I am a patriot. My country is a red line. Tunisia is a red line. Foreigners should not interfere in our politics or our country. I do not want anyone to interfere.
We could have been a great country, but they made us poor. They let us eat from the rubbish, to eat stale bread. What did they do the past 10 years?
Now, joining me for more perspectives on this is Philip Pandey, a policy analyst who joins me from Kisumu in Kenya. Thank you so much for joining Philip on Africa Update today.
Many thanks, Ayub. Once again, it's a pleasure to join you from the most strategic city in the East African community, Kisumu. It is a pleasure to talk to the people of Africa on Africa Update.
All right, thank you so much. Well, you are in Kisumu, one of the hotbeds, I may say, in Kenya where this protest took place. Could you paint us a picture of what exactly happened in Kisumu?
Very well, Ayub. Kisumu is traditionally the hotbed of protest or civil disobedience in Kenya, as it were. That is second to none. I believe that even the national capital, Nairobi, borrows a lot from practices from Kisumu. So what was here last Monday were organized onset at 6 a.m. when the masses who were reporting into the cities, the streets. Initially, we didn't see much of a police presence even in the last 3 days before the main protest. Just to take you back, Ayub, before the Monday protest on the 20th, there were what we could call rehearsals at least 3 days before the main event. And in those events, the masses walked towards the State Lodge Road, which is in Kisumu, the third city in Kenya. And in those events, the police were calm, the public was calm, and it was by consensus that they needed to not to get to the State Lodge gates, which the public had intended to go to. So there was no police confrontation initially. But on the 20th of March, then what began immediately, the people began showing up in the streets, were dispersion by the police, shooting in the air, dispersion by means of tear gas and police force for that matter. So much of the protests that were planned did not take place as were planned because the police interrupted.
Okay, so what's at the heart of this protest? It is, from what we understand, it's about the rising cost of living, isn't it? Don't you think that we are creating more problems by aiming to solve one? Because if there's a rising cost of living, now going to protests leading to shutting down of businesses, that in itself is a problem, isn't it?
My unbiased opinion, cost of living is a reality, not just in Kenya, but across many economies now. We have seen such a regime that is not responsive to the calls of the public. For example, on Monday, this week on the dailies, one of the local dailies, the front page had a story about 802 million Kenya shillings. That's an equivalent of about $8 million that was intended to purchase motor vehicle for the office of the president, that's the deputy president of the president, and the office of the prime cabinet secretary. So basically three top government officials accumulating or consuming $8 million in purchase of motor vehicle, while the public, for example, is asking for subsidies for maize flour, for fuel, for fast-moving commodities that make daily meals for wananchi or the citizens in this part of the country. So yes, we could say that there is a cost of living, denting many economies, inflation going up, global recession predicted at 1% for this particular fiscal year. But then, what are the actions taken by the government? What is endangering the lives of people? And what is the opposition reading as malice in terms of actions by the government? So the inaction by government of curiosity, a lot of animosity on the part of the opposition and those who subscribe to the general feeling that there is a heightened cost of living, but there is no stopgap measure, or there is no safety net for those who are suffering at this particular moment.
Okay. Philip, to be fair, isn't it too early for Kenyans to begin to expect any change from this government, given the fact that the issue of inflation, this global inflation started as far as maybe 2 years ago with the COVID-19 pandemic, and so he is barely 6 months into office. So isn't it too early?
Time is of essence, and if you ask me, I would be fair to say that yes, we needed to be more patient with new administrations and people coming into office, especially after the deaths of COVID-19. We needed to be more patient with administrations coming into office, especially after the Russia-Ukrainian invasion. We needed to be more patient with new administrations that are facing, the global recession in 2023. But there is a peculiar shift in policy in Kenya, for instance. In the last administration of President Uhuru Kenyatta, there were stopgap measures, safety nets that were installed by the very administration to safeguard the public. One of them was a maize flour subsidy that ensured that maize still retailed at the correct prices for the public to afford. The other one was a fuel subsidy that also ensured that at pump prices were still affordable per liter for motorists and for consumption for industrial goods. But then immediately the new regime came in, the initial things that they did were to, for example, do away with the subsidies both for fuel and the maize flour. They did away with a number of what were seen to be, safety nets for cautioning the public from, deeper pains and afflictions that were occurring due to the denting economic times. Okay. So Kenyans are not particularly responding to the fact that the regime is only 7 months old but has not had time. The regime had time but has shifted policy, has shifted focus from cautioning poor Kenyans by revising policy and ensuring that those that were places of comfort are now, removed, and people are facing life head on. People are facing the bare knuckles of economic downtimes.
Okay, Philip, I'm imagining that the government will make the case that the policies you just mentioned are not reaching the very people it was meant for. So perhaps they could make the argument of corruption and, not being able to achieve the desired results that these policies were meant for.
Ayub, that's a fair argument. If you ask policy and fiscal analysts in Kenya, for example, they'll tell you that in 7 months alone of President William Ruto's regime, the office of the president has spent more than the president in the previous regime was spending in 12 months. The State House and office of the president budget has gone, fourfold, which means that at the executive level, people are enjoying the little resources that we keep talking about the limited exchequer that wananchi or the public are not experiencing or enjoying at all. So it would be a small cake to call it, but the small cake not divided among anyone else other than the executive. The other thing, Ayub, that I would mention is in terms of taxation, there have been a lot of adjustments in our tax regimes. For example, in another looming tax on second-hand clothes is that tax per kilo of second-hand clothes imported is going to go up by 4 times more than the initial spending by traders in that aspect. This very new regime has introduced extra regimes on our taxes. For example, on various aspects of raw materials, on various aspects of shifting from retailers being able to enjoy a more conducive tax environment, wholesalers being able to bring in goods. And, there have been particular attacks on enterprises. And just recently, I had an article featured in one of the dailies warning against rampant shift on policies that then begin to target SMEs that are foreign-led or businesses that are Asian-led or
Philip.
South-led, that has public policy implications on the geopolitics scales and global aspects.
Okay, Philip, let's take a much more maybe holistic view now of this. This protest is not only happening in Kenya, it's happening in South Africa, where we see the opposition leader, Julius Malema, leader of the EFF, talk about, jobs, high rate of unemployment. He talks about, cut in terms of supply of electricity. So that's a myriad of challenges there. In Kenya, we hear Raila Odinga talk about the claims that he won the elections. Don't you think that the opposition is taking advantage of some of these economic crises and latching on it?
Ayub, there is no separation between politics and economics. Polity determines what happens in terms of economic policies, cultural diversities, and even the social space for political actors, for the civil society, and many others. So politics is the mother of all other aspects to life in any given economy or civilization. In South Africa, in Kenya here, in Senegal, in Tunisia, the issues are the same, just like you mentioned. There is a convergence on one, political reforms, and then secondly on economic issues, and peculiarly targeted economic policies that are shifting from responding to the real issues that citizens across these nations are talking about. South Africa, for example, has experienced a downturn in terms of economic growth for the last period of, I could say, 2 years in the regime of President Ramaphosa. And in Tunisia, the situation is more elevated. Looking at the facts that the opposition, for example, the National Salvation Front is talking about. So I wouldn't say that opposition leaders are taking advantage of economics to play politics. If you go back to the history of the Arab Spring, the issues were the same, the goals were the same. Talking about reforms, talking about inclusion, talking about employment, talking about creation of a fair platform for all citizens. And those revolutions that occurred 10 years now have shaped the the future of African politics, or global politics for that matter, that citizens and opposition leaders, civil society movements, religious institutions, and formations that do not agree with the economic policies can then march and dictate what they want to feel like, they want to be subjected to.
Okay, Philip, let's talk about local solutions in a minute or two, if you can. What local solutions are available to us, considering the fact that these are global challenges? The issue of inflation is a global challenge. We talk more about how much the Russia-Ukraine war has impacted on our economy, even in Africa. You know, the same with the issue of COVID-19 pandemic and the rest of them. Local solutions, how much focus are we giving to that?
Firstly, the dents of COVID are still with us. The economic effects of COVID were not sufficiently addressed in 2021, 2022, and even today in fiscal budgets across all civilizations. And so really, we require advisory offices, economic offices for our presidencies and our economies to be very peculiar and specific with addressing underlying issues that then has led to overprojection or building budgets on sands rather than on solid ground. The other thing immediately is that we know that we're experiencing an heightened inflation, even in Europe, even in UK. It was predicted by April this year then that UK would have the highest level of inflation in unprecedented levels than before. So one thing that governments must do is to have immediate safety nets that safeguard the issues now. It's action now, and things need to be done and corrected now. For example, in Kenya, we have the regime talking about fertilizer subsidy that is coming to effect in 6 months. I mean, the production would only help Kenyans in 6 months. But before 6 months, then, people are sitting tight. As they sit tight, they have to afford the daily bread. So what helps nations and citizens to secure daily bread? Just as it like it were in the COVID times, many economies compressed development funding. Yes, development is important. Infrastructure funding is important, but at core is the spending on what makes life sustainable, what makes life livable today and in the future. So let's have stopgap measures that deal with the urgency of now. Let's have medium-term plans like the ones that we are hearing about in Kenya, and I know other economies are trying to implement that. And then let's have posterity measures. So immediately, it is the urgency of now for every economy.
All right. Thank you so much, Philip Pandey, policy analyst and governance analyst, joining us. Thank you for your perspectives on Africa Update.
Many thanks. Once again, it's a pleasure talking to you on pertinent issues that affect our economies. We hope that the protest across the 5 African countries will not just be looked at in light of politics, but then in addressing the social challenges that we experience on the continent to alleviate poverty, to alleviate exclusion, and to ensure that we work towards prosperity of our continent.
All right, thank you so much. All right, now you're watching Africa Update on Trust TV. Coming up after the break, activists embark on 862-kilometer work to advocate for a federation between Mali and Burkina Faso. Join us again for more. Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Africa Update on Trust TV. Now, 862 kilometers from Bamako to Ouagadougou by foot, over 150-hour journey. That's the cost for activists who are pushing for a federation between the two West African states of Mali and Burkina Faso. Holding the flags of both countries and the African Union, the group of about a dozen men and women walked single file over the weekend on the side of a road surrounded by scrubland near Houndé in western Burkina Faso. Take a look.
Today, we want to push our governments, our institutions and our peoples to move toward a federation because we believe that only a federation can be the global and definitive solution for Africa. Today, we believe that to secure the Sahel, we need very strong armies, but also that the states must harmonize their security policy and strategy with their development policy. So that's why we, step by step, city by city, village by village, we communicate with the populations. On the federation, which our two heads of state hold dearly, we have decided to work very closely on this between now and the holding of a mixed commission in Burkina Faso. We understand that there has already been a commission specifically set up at the foreign ministry level to address this question.
And that's a wrap on Africa Update. For more, watch on our social media platforms and also on our YouTube live stream. Join us again next week for another time. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.